Funny enough, actually the video from last year is still on my YouTube, where I essentially do the exact same thing. However, even watching my own live videos, I notice that I say and do sometimes different things for each one. And sometimes I even look back and I'm like, oh man, I forgot to say that. That was way better. So it's definitely worth your time to look at the other D1 videos to see if they relate. And sometimes you can even see where we're going, right, with some of this information in the project. And I know for some students that's really helpful. However, all I've done for today was open up Photoshop. I went ahead and downloaded Audacity. So if you don't have that, it is free. And for some of us, we have multiple methods for this. So if you don't have any sheet music, you'll definitely want the Audacity method, right? Of course, in my case, I need to allow the program, blah, 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 accept and continue, okay. But essentially, I'll put my MP3 file in here. Now, for the sake of, do I have an MP3 somewhere? Gothic. Oh, well, hopefully that's not anything bad. But let's say the name of my song was Gothic. I'm going to basically just drag my MP3 right into Audacity. And it's going to produce a wave image for me. Essentially what this wave image is all the blue lines that you'll see is really just the amplitude of the volume, right? There's really nothing special there. It's not technically the sheet music or anything like that. And as you can see, maybe Gothic was way too big. Let's try a different MP3. 2 megabytes. Yeah, I don't know what. Maybe it's downloaded? We'll give it a second. But more or less, let's show you what it kind of looks like. Let's see, Audacity wave file. Kind of more or less just so you can kind of see. Looks like that, right? But what's interesting about that little graph in time is that it really is the music itself. So if there is silence in the music, there's no blue. If it's very loud in the music, it's a very high peak, right? So essentially, what you're looking at is the volume, which is kind of weird. You're looking at sound. I don't know about you, but that is kind of weird. And the more that you zoom in into this map, and that's what is kind of nice about Audacity, you can zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and it'll actually show you the sine wave of this motherfucker, right? It's insane to think that all the instruments are jam-packed into a single waveform. I don't know, it still boggles my mind today. But interesting enough, we can start to diagram with this image. So for the sake of tutorial, I'm just going to take a screenshot of that real quick. But essentially, you'll do the same thing to your MP3. However, if you're taking an MP3 off of YouTube, another way that you could do this is YouTube to MP3. And honestly, there's tons of them, right? So you can always take, I mean, maybe I shouldn't show this in a video, but this is obviously for educational purposes. We're not ripping off music in any way. And if anybody's watching this from the government, I'm sorry, but it is for educational purposes. But yeah, usually you'll have like YouTube made. Actually, these change every year, probably for legal reasons. Anyway, but get that MP3 and put it on Audacity. Now, this is just if you can't find the sheet music, or maybe the sheet music you found isn't maybe even the right one, or maybe it's even too pixelated, you're not getting enough information. So there's definitely two options, and to be fair, I'm okay with either one, right? Even if you got sheet music and you want to do it this way, cool, right? But if you don't have sheet music, obviously this might be the only alternative you have. So let's take that screenshot, and let's go ahead. Man, it's still working with Gothic. Don't worry. Stop doing that. But it is free, and no, you don't even have to make an account for Audacity. You can install it on both Windows and Macintosh. However, keep in mind the school computers don't have Audacity, and we can install it to them, so keep that in mind. It will have to be done from a personal computer or maybe even a friend's computer. Usually this doesn't take about 10 minutes, right? Because really all you need is that screenshot. So once we're in Photoshop, I've basically just set it to an 11 by 17. Obviously to interact with that 45-second drawing that we did earlier. So I'm going to go to File, Place, Embedded. You could do linked, but you know, if you accidentally move the file, it's going to be gone forever. So in my case, there's that file I wanted, and more or less, I'm going to put it right there. Now for me, I'm going to kind of do it two ways in the tutorial, but more or less, that's kind of all I need right there. And to even get started, I can do Control-R, right? And get my rulers on both sides. And to be fair, I could even click and drag out, and even start to give myself an indication of what peaks that I actually wanted. Or for instance, I may realize, oh wait, this is my 45-second to 60-second piece. Oh no, maybe that's the piece I want to work with. That's okay too. If that be the case though, please don't let this be your screenshot. Zoom in into Audacity instead, and let that be the whole frame. Now keep in mind it's going to look a little bit different than this large wave file going on. In your case, if it's only like 5 seconds, we might get this really generative thing. I mean, especially if it's a harp going, right? So again, zoom in into Audacity if that works out better. Hopefully that's making some sense. And clearly, maybe just hearing this video might sort of re-spark some of those ideas. But let's say we do have our sheet music. So I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded, and I do think I got another piece. Yep. Let's go ahead and take that piece instead. So to be fair, even though we've kind of spliced it to 45 to 60 seconds, it could get even smaller. What I would say is don't let it get any bigger, right? Because that's why we kind of narrowed it down to 45 or 60 seconds. But some of us, well, in that 45 to 60 seconds, it has that main piece of why we chose it, right? Maybe it has a da-dun, dun, 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 da-dun, and that only lasts like 3 seconds. So maybe I just want that piece in Audacity, or maybe I just want that piece in the sheet music. Again, this is more about the melody or the motif, or some sort of syncopated rhythm that seems to be coming up more than often, right? Your piece may have it, your piece may not. It might just be sort of a trilly moment, right? So again, really that decision's up to you, what you want to start to diagram from the music. But again, we can kind of do the exact same thing. In my case, I'll hit enter and solidify that layer. And even naturally, I mean, I can kind of even go back and forth between them and go, you know, I want to go with the Audacity one, I want to go with the sheet music. Please don't put them together. I've never seen it done well, and I've seen it done too many times badly. In fact, one of the first times I did this, we kind of did all kinds of experimental things, and it was quite the mess. So this comes with actually a lot of practice, and why also we have 2 separate diagrams now, one for both music and one for, of course, the instrument. But this one, frankly, I've encouraged just be listening to the music at the same time. The motif should almost kind of jump out at you if you have yet to find the motif of your music. For some of us, it's an absolute drone, and it just drones on the entire piece, right? Where some don't really seemingly to have a melody. For instance, like Monse's piece, where it's like, there's just maybe critical moments that kind of have these main melodies. Otherwise, it's just like constantly fast, right? However, in this piece that you actually see, this one's of the guitar, right? Or I can't remember who I stole it from. But you'll notice that there's actually multiple sets of music going on. For instance, we have a treble clef and a bass clef. I'll let that be up to you how complex you want this grid system to be. Honestly, go for it. Right? I mean, try to shoot for complexity, but if it gets too much, obviously narrow down what you're diagramming. So for instance, well, maybe I just stick on the treble clef. Okay, well, I'm gonna get 1. Maybe I'm gonna get the center point of each of those. Oh. Make sure you're actually in there. So I'm kind of starting off with the grid lines themselves. Just because it makes it a lot easier to see, right? I can start to see that, especially at the top, way easier than it is to sometimes, especially if you've never looked at music before, it could be like, whoa, like this is making me dizzy, right? Brings me back to 6th grade. But after this, essentially we want to establish something new. So in my case, I'm going to make a new layer, and let's get my screen to where you can see that a little bit better. Or not. Thanks, Mac. Obviously, I think it's a little bit of this projector. There we go. Trying to help out. Actually, it looks okay up there. Not too bad. But we'll make a new layer. So if you go down to this little plus sign, we'll click on new layer. And in my case, I'll call it grids. Why not? I'll go ahead and use a brush tool. So B as in brush. And I don't necessarily want a green line. So I'm going to go with something much more like drafting color. I never use true black. Why? Because it's just often way too dark, especially when we print it. And very often, especially in architecture, we're actually going for a drafted look. So I use kind of an off gray. If you've ever looked at your graphite, it's kind of a shiny dark gray. It's not black, even though in our mind it's the darkest element of making. So anyway, just a small tutorial into computer graphics for a second. But let's go ahead and make those lines. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that I'm on this new layer, right? And line up more or less. In fact, the program starts to kind of help you a little bit. So I'm just gonna hold shift and click. Hold shift and click. As you can see, it's gonna create those lines for us. And we'll start to get a grid system. Now, to be fair, I think that looks better, right? It looks like somebody drafted it, right? I mean, once you kind of get these lines out of the way. So let's go ahead and think actually you have to click on them one at a time, which is kind of annoying. But hey, if it leads to a straighter line, it leads to a straighter line. To be fair, you could skip that point altogether if you're pretty good at Photoshop. Yeah, you could probably just brush it in with your grid layer. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. Some people's computer are fast enough and you can make a line. Another way to make a line is, of course, the tool shape itself. So if you take a look at the rectangle tool and right click on it, there is a line tool. Some people, they choose that, and that's fine. However, it still requires the same steps of holding shift. And to be fair, you can't really do much with it. And I don't know about you, but one looks more like a drafted line than the other, right? This one looks like a computer line, so that is just what it is. However, if you click on it, you can change some of its attributes, such as its stroke and its color and things like that. So I'm not trying to get so much into the line tool. I'm much more of a fan of the brush tool anyway. But essentially, from here, we're almost about done. So let's say I got all my grids. Lastly, maybe I need some words. So in my case, I'm going to use a text box. And I'd probably make my own layer to this, right? Because, well, I may want to rotate it or, do something to it. ZZ top. Anyway. So let's maybe make a new layer. We'll call it text. After all, the last part of this diagram is not necessarily anything color or anything like that, but maybe some text to reveal some of the relationships in the music, such as fast, or, what's another way for fast? Anybody think of another word for fast? I don't even know how to spell thesaurus. I think I just always rely on Google on that one. Thesaurus, yeah. It always reminds me of a dinosaur. Anyway. But yeah, go look up on thesaurus. Go find a $5 word, right, for fast. Quickly, swiftly, hot. Man, that's another way of saying fast. You're so hot. I'm calling you fast? Anyway. Promptly, briskly, by leaps and bounds, double quick, a full throttle. Oh, that's not exactly a word, right? Lickety split. So be very careful with your word choice. But again, this actually might be a really iconic way of getting somebody to remember your music. Keep in mind that these diagrams are eventually going to be what communicate the music for your project. So if there's something like in Moonlight Sonata, I'm probably not going to use daylight for one of my words when it's about moonlight, right? Maybe I use something a little bit more mysterious or something that matches the ambient quality that I'm hearing, right, in my music. Don't get me wrong, there's stronger answers than some, and to be fair, it is completely subjective. But please don't use hot, right? That's a 3-letter word. Use a $5 word, and what I mean by that is something that's a little bit more descriptive. However, let's use quickly for today, obviously for the sake of tutorial. So I can even get fancy with the fonts here. We'll use something like that, and we'll use quickly or swiftly. But nicely enough, of course, at the top, if you don't have these toolbars, by the way, you can always regular click on this top right-hand button and make sure that it's an Essentials Classic or Essentials. Definitely important, especially if you're missing all of your tools. Let's go back to that quickly. Yeah, let's mess around with it a little bit. I'm going to do Command T, as in Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I'm going to transform it. Right, I can make it really big. I can make it very short. And in fact, even what we can do to words can sometimes be quite interesting. But I can further shape it. And if I hold shift, I can really shape it almost making it into a whole new thing, right? Maybe it actually symbolizes that this entire area starts to be quickly, right? Now, don't get me wrong, that's pretty dramatic, and to be fair, it's kind of hard to even see that it says quickly anymore, right? So don't get too fancy like I have, but I just wanted to express that you could, right, in order to invoke a response, right? You could even start to change the color of these, right? I could double click, and right now I'm in like a gray form, but maybe I wanted it to kind of have that warmth that I have in the music, right? And I could definitely change the color as well, right? So again, once we're done with this portion of the diagram, and really you want to complete the rest. Obviously, I just did a small portion of it to get an idea of what we're looking for. To be fair, you could even go an extra step and give us even a hierarchy to these rhythms and lines that you want to show us. More or less, try not to trace the staff, right? I will say that. Try to only get the notes and really the spaces in between the notes. After all, it's the architecture of music, and you've just never been taught it that way. But it really is. It's a plan of the music. And what's weird is that the music is frozen right now, and as soon as I press play, the notes will start to come out. But really, more or less, it's all right there in one single second, right? It kind of reminds me of a joke, like where somebody goes, "Hey, did you know I can say all of the states in the United States in less than a half a second? You want to hear it?" Right? And the joke is that all the states were actually in there, but it was just in a fraction of a second, right? Almost like quantum theory and where quantum physics is going, right? That all the answers are there, but they don't realize themselves until you look. You guys familiar with the double slit experiment? It's an iconic experiment where they set up a camera and it made one pattern, and then when they looked away, it made another pattern, showing and indicating that the observer in this reality has an effect on reality. Now, don't get me wrong, like Einstein rolled over in his grave, Newton was like, "Well, I'm done," right? But they're starting to introduce a whole nother paradigm of physics and gravity, right? I mean, after all, it's not called the law of gravity, it's called the theory of gravity, and they're coming up with constantly new theories for these phenomena. Ever so realizing that possibly this place is more conscious than we've ever really understood. And I like to think that music actually is a really good representation of this. Those wonderful feelings of passion that I know I heard when I heard the Ninth Symphony by Mozart, right? It was the music and not the music at the same time. It was those exact notes in the exact order, but it was also the way that it was played, right? So this is your attempt to tell us how you feel about the music. What did you hear, right? So just like we saw from Carlos, starting to add a little bits of those pieces of music into the diagram, into his instrument diagram, have that energy go towards this diagram where we should kind of see those grid patterns, maybe even intersections of those things actually even happening. In fact, I may even get to, like say, my piece right here, the music itself, and dial it back 50%. And maybe really reveal some of those lines that I put on it, right? To be fair, didn't do that much in the projector, as much as it did in probably the recording. Go big or go home, that's maybe 10%. But it really starts to reveal the grid pattern and relationship of those things. Hopefully making some sense, at least for what you need. Now, obviously, once I was finished, I could do File, Export, and save it as a JPEG. I could take that JPEG and, of course, drag it right onto Miro and be ready for Friday. Now, keep in mind, this one's due Friday, and it's mostly because it requires a computer a little bit. However, if you want to get started on it and get some feedback on it on Wednesday, that is absolutely acceptable, right? However, keep in mind, for Wednesday and Friday, we definitely will be pinning up, right? That way, we can take a look at the diagrams, and more or less, if everything goes smoothly, we'll have another assignment for Friday. That way it gives you the weekend to take a look at it. To be fair, next week, next Friday, we have the day off. Next Friday, not this Friday. And then the following week after that, I think we have Friday off again. So it's going to be, I know, the energy is going to start to get really low, but it's also going to start to be this like, oh crap, it just feels weird. I feel out of sync a little bit. I don't know what's really due. And he gave me like 6 days to do this, right? So don't let the energy get low, guys. In fact, practice these things while you can, because you'll definitely need them in D2, which is why we introduce them for this project. Because you will be expected to know a little bit of Photoshop, even if it means just a couple of grid lines and placing some imagery and some text. Fair enough? To be fair, I didn't even really get into fonts or anything like that. However, if you check out my page, I've got actually tons of Photoshop stuff. Maybe not exactly D1, but definitely helpful in that regard. Any questions about this since we are still recording? And I can actually answer it directly so that you can take a look at it later. Yes? You could, absolutely. Great question. I could do the exact same thing. I could even start to get picky, right? And make it only about maybe those 3 pieces. However, keep in mind some things do repeat, so be careful, right? Obviously, for the dun 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 dun, doing a horizontal line will do nothing because it's the same note. It didn't move, right? So, in some cases it'll work. In some cases it may not. But fantastic question. Anything else, guys? For the most part, get it? Very good. We'll leave it at that for the recording.